Yeah, thank you everyone for joining today. We'll go ahead and kick it over to Ben and the team from GEDSA for this session on an ENFit update.
Thanks so much, Vanessa. Welcome everybody to today's webinar, ENFit Update Advancements in Patient Safety. We're so glad you've taken the time to join us for this important discussion. As we go through the presentation, if you have any questions, please feel free to enter them in the Teams Q&A feature. We will address them during a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the webinar. At the end of the presentation, a QR code will be displayed and the link will also be posted in the chat. This will direct you to a brief survey that you must complete to receive your nursing and/or dietitian CE credit and certificate. The organizers of this webinar have no financial conflicts of interest to disclose. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Ben Davis. Ben has been the executive director of the Global Engineered Device Supplier Association, commonly known as GEDSA, for the last 3 years, but has been involved with the organization since 2012, serving on various committees and on the board of directors. He is previously a VP of Engineering and Product Development in the medical device industry. He is also an inventor on over 75 patents and holds a BS in Industrial Engineering from the Georgia Institute of Technology. Our second speaker is Janelle Flaherty, RD, CNSC. Janelle has over 15 years of experience in the home health arena as a clinician and leading a team of enteral dietitians who work with providers, patients, and their families to navigate their tube feeding journey in the home, from management of tolerance challenges to troubleshooting of tube site, and supply issues. She also works closely with distributors and manufacturer partners to evaluate products and manage supply chain changes and challenges. And with that, let's turn it over to Ben, who will kick off our webinar.
Yes, thank you so much, Madison. I'd like to start just to kind of give you a quick about GEDSA, sort of what we are. GEDSA stands for the Global Engineered Device Supplier Association. We're a nonprofit trade association with the mission of advancing patient safety through engineered device solutions and initiatives that are coordinated among stakeholders spanning across the healthcare spectrum, basically worldwide. We do that primarily through two initiatives. One's called ENFit, which we're talking about today. That's an enteral connector standard, and the other is ENFit, which is a neuraxial connector standard. Between those two groups, we have over 40 manufacturers and about 30 supporting organizations that we also work with. The way we're structured is, we interact with quite a few clinicians. We have clinical advisory boards. We have a supply chain and clinical advisory group. Of course, we also liaise with all of our manufacturing members through routine meetings in various committees that we hold with them. And that's the ENFit side of our organization. We also have this whole other side called ENFit, which is basically structured the same as ENFit. It's just for those device manufacturers and clinicians that are more in the neuraxial or anesthesia space. And our supporting organizations, what does that mean? Well, that's mainly bodies like the FDA, ISO, ASPEN, FLAMPE, BRASPEN, ISMP, ECRI, basically professional societies and patient safety organizations and regulatory bodies. And then we're also we're governed by our board of directors. And as you noticed, I said we're the Global Engineered Device Supplier Association. And for those that have known about GEDSA, that may strike you a little differently or be like, well, is that what it was? Because we actually historically were known as the Global Enteral Device Supplier Association, but around August of last year, we actually rebranded to the Global Engineered Device Supplier Association. We did that because we're not just enteral now. We are in the neuraxial area, and we'll probably take on future initiatives that could be in some other area. So we rebranded to sort of better reflect the scope of what we do. So anyways, moving forward, you'll probably hopefully hear us referred to as Global Engineered Device Supplier Association. Our agenda for today, the main goal, really overall, is to raise awareness of tubing misconnections and the enteral ENFit ISO 80369-3 patient safety initiative. We'll do this through 3 modules where we'll cover, and along the way, we'll basically provide updates of some latest, greatest information. Our first module we'll kick off is going to be an overview of tubing misconnections and recent updates. Module 2 will get into improving patient access to medication administration items. And then module 3 will cover conversion planning and some additional resources that are available. And as Madison mentioned, we'll wrap it up with a Q&A session at the end. So let's get into module 1, overview of tubing misconnections and recent updates. So let's start with just defining what is a misconnection. I like the FDA's definition. They define a misconnection as inappropriate connections occurring between two connectors that attach devices with different intended uses or applications, such as enteral feeding systems and non-enteral systems. Tubing misconnections can lead to serious injury or death. And I like to share this image and then this link on the bottom right, because if you follow this link to the FDA's webpage, they actually recreate or have simulations showing actual misconnection events that have occurred. So they've taken actual events, simulated them, and then they've provided the background for each one. They've said, how it happened, what the patient outcome was. So I encourage you, if you have just a few minutes, to explore that link and get kind of a full idea of the different possibilities that are out there for tubing misconnections. But to just share a few with you to give you some examples from that page, I'll walk you through these. So the first one is an epidural infusion set connected to a peripheral IV. This actually delivered epidural medication into the bloodstream and resulted in patient death. Next one was a feeding tube connected to an inline ventilator suction catheter. This delivered feeding contents into the patient's lungs and also unfortunately resulted in death. Then another one was a heparin lock for the peripheral IV route. This was connected to an automatic blood pressure cuff, which delivered air into the bloodstream, and this one also resulted in death. And the last one here was a feeding tube was coupled with a peripheral line of a pregnant woman. This resulted in enteral nutrition being delivered directly into the bloodstream. Neither the 35-week-old fetus or the woman survived, unfortunately. So now that we've defined a tubing misconnection and we've given some examples of tubing misconnections, maybe the next logical question is, well, how common are these tubing misconnections? Well, a literature review was done in 2011 to try to answer this question. This was the tubing misconnections normalization of deviance paper that came out, or article. In that, they found 116 cases of enteral tubing misconnections from 1972 to 2010. Of those 116 cases, 21 patients died, and 84 of the patients survived, but with complications. Now, the update here is that last summer, 2024, another literature review came out. This one was the Lingering Safety Minutes, a 10-year review of enteral misconnection adverse events and narrative review. This review basically picked up with the last one left off. So this started at 2011 and went through 2023. And in that, they found 96 new cases of enteral tubing misconnections, of which 4 patients died and 66 patients survived with harm reported. So that means that together, between these two literature reviews, we now have 212 cases of enteral misconnections reported that unfortunately had 25 deaths associated with them. So that's what's in the literature. But of course, we know that not all events make it to the literature. Not everything gets reported correctly or gets reported at all. So to really try to get a handle on what the actual occurrence rate is of these, a survey was done in 2006 by the FDA in Aspen. They had 182 responding clinicians, and of those, about 16% stated that their institution had experienced an enteral misconnection. Now, the update here is, back at the end of October of 2024, ISMP came out with part 1 of 2. Basically, it was a 2-part series, and this first part was kind of basically, it was like identifying the problem. So it had a survey where in this part 1, they discussed the findings of the survey, where essentially it's ascertaining the same thing, like what is the occurrence rate of tubing misconnections. Now, an important distinction here is that this survey, the first one, was only enteral misconnections. This survey captured all tubing misconnection types. And so of those 261 respondents, 124, or almost 48%, reported having experienced a tubing misconnection of any type at their facility during their career. And the most common misconnection here included IV to enteral, That was 39% of those that were reported. And the next highest was the IV to neuraxial misconnection, and that was 22% of what was reported. So if you think that kind of makes sense, then why GEDSA is doing ENFit and NRFit, and really why maybe ENFit started before, because it's the highest occurrence rate, and then the neuraxial to IV is the next highest occurrence rate. One thing I want to mention too, just briefly, the number from the previous survey was 15.9%. If within the second survey, if you look at what was just enteral misconnections, it made up 17.6% of what was reported. So I think it's kind of interesting that over the course of almost 20 years, the two surveys, one said 15.9% and the other said 17.6%. So they're really, really close for enteral misconnections. I really think maybe that that very minor increase, I think, is probably just attributed to more people in 2024 knowing what a misconnection actually is, as opposed to 2006. There probably wasn't as much awareness. So I think we probably were able to capture more with this later survey. But a real key takeaway, though, I think in all of this is that 79% of these incidences went unreported, or their reporting statuses are just unknown. So our assumption has been that there's only so much in the literature. A lot of these things don't get reported, or they're misreported, or maybe they're reported as a medication administration error. Well, that's maybe not untrue, but that's not actually the root cause. Maybe the root cause was a tubing misconnection, but it's not flagged that way, so it's just not captured. But I do think that's a very key takeaway. You're only going to find so much in the literature. A lot of these go underreported or misreported. So now we've defined the misconnection, given some examples, talked about what's in the literature, what we think the occurrence rate is, but let's talk about how do these actually happen. Well, it can be attributed to a multitude of things. I mean, we say it's due to unintended or off-label use of the devices. It's human error, maybe it's nursing turnover, low lighting, time pressures. I mean, the list can go on and on and on, but what's really central to all these, or if you will, what's sort of the root cause of misconnection, is a compatibility between connectors. So as long as you have connectors that you can either intentionally connect, so like for instance, I don't mean intentionally, but I mean they're designed connects, like a lure to a lure across different systems, that's a mechanical compatibility. That's not good. But also if you have a connector that's maybe not intended to connect, is in like a soft female, like funnel style tubing connector, it's pliable. You can force fit different things in there that should not fit into there. So that's also what we mean by compatible connectors, things that you can kind of force compatibility with as well. And until you eliminate that possibility, you've not eliminated the risk of tubing misconnections. So how do we solve this? Well, lots of things have been tried over the years to solve tubing misconnections, and I like to share this ISMB's hierarchy of effectiveness of risk reduction strategies on the right, because it, I think, kind of helps us step through the things that have been done before. The least effective but easiest to implement things usually come first, so that's what's been tried over time. We've had things such as labeling, of course, color coding, policies, procedures, rules, a lot of things that are basically based on human reliability. So those, they're easy to implement, but they're not very effective, and because they do rely on basically humans, and we're fallible. We make mistakes. The most effective but hardest to implement goes further up the scale here, where we get toward a forcing function. This basically is a mechanical or engineered mechanical solution to where you've basically gotten to the root cause of what the actual problem is, and in this case, it's the mechanical compatibility of connectors. So if you can make them incompatible across different connectors, that's the way to really get to the root cause. So essentially, this is a way of eliminating hazards through design, or eliminating misconnections through the design of the connectors. And it was basically with this in mind that years ago, the International Organization for Standardization, ISO, developed the ISO 80369 series of standards. So essentially with this, each body or bodily system got its own set of dedicated connectors through its own ISO standard. So now the IV, which is ISO 80369-7, the lure connector is now dedicated to that. So before, lure has been used pretty much, I mean, it's 125 years old, the lure taper is at least. So it's been used in pretty much every imaginable application. Well, now it is dedicated to this -7 ISO standard, and it's dedicated just for IV applications. We have ISO 80369-5 is for limb cuff. You have -4 is for the urinary collection. -6 is for neuraxial or ENFit, which is also what GETSA does. -2 is dedicated to respiratory applications. And of course, what we're talking about today is the -3, which is enteral, or what we call the ENFit connector. The key point of all these is that these connectors are mechanically engineered to be incompatible across the other areas of therapy, so they will not cross connect with one another, and they have a material hardness requirement to where they cannot be like force fitted. They won't flex and stretch to where you can sort of force fit things that shouldn't fit as well. And with that, I will pass it to Janelle, where she can discuss some of the benefits actually of that ISO standardization and some of the benefits of regional and global transition to ENFit.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Yeah, so as Ben talked about, patient safety is certainly the primary goal of creating the ISO standard, but we have seen other benefits to standardization that have emerged as we've seen the transition, and those benefits apply to providers and suppliers and patients as well. So if you want to advance, thanks, Ben. So I'll start talking first about reduced training. And so when you think about when there are multiple tube connection types, you have to train your staff on all those different types of connections. And it's a whole lot simpler to train one system type. And myself, I think about when I first started as an RD in home care, and my mind is being boggled by all the parts and pieces, and having to learn and remember which pieces worked with which tube, and trying to keep them all straight. And so having the standardization really just helps in being able to train and simplify training so that there's only one thing that needs to remember. And with that, I think what comes is a reduced risk of what I call a service failure, where someone picks the wrong item and ships the wrong item to a patient. They get that item and it won't connect to their tube. And again, when you have that one standard connection, there's much less risk of shipping the wrong product out to a patient. Kind of along the same lines, when I think about adapters, like anytime you have to use an adapter to connect and feed for a patient, it again increases that risk that they're going to lose that adapter. Maybe they're going to go home without that adapter is going to break, and then they're going to be stuck in a situation where they're not going to be able to connect and feed. And so again, having this standardization where you don't need these extra adapters and pieces to connect can really help reduce that risk of that patient being stuck, not able to feed. And I've certainly, again, seen that in home care where someone leaves the hospital and forgets their piece behind, and they actually have to go back in order to feed because it's going to take a couple days to ship the adapter that they need to that patient. So looking at product innovations and product options, again, having that standard connection opens up your options for products because you can cross between different manufacturers. And that allows you to pick and choose the features that you prefer or that are going to work best for your patients and that patient population. So that could be the color of the tube, or if you have a material preference for a tube, or you find one product has more ease of use, again, having that standard connection lets you cross between. So it really opens up product options for you. And with innovation, so of course, when you have new innovations coming out, if a manufacturer has to think about creating an innovation for 5 different connection types, that's a lot harder for them to do. If they can innovate for a standard connection, you see more innovation that way. And we have seen that in the space come out with new innovations coming out. And it means it's available for any patient with a feeding tube instead of only for certain patients who have a certain type of tube. So my favorite topic, supply disruptions and back orders, and not favorite because I like it, but favorite because I'm pretty passionate about it with the amount of back orders that we've really seen, I feel like, since 2020. So when you think about, again, a manufacturer who has to run multiple product lines, they run their legacy products, then they run their ENFit products. That's 2 separate lines they have to run, and they have to pick and choose how to use their resources and what to allocate to those product lines. And so that means less supply of each because they have to produce both. And so as these manufacturers have been able to streamline into a single standardized connection, it means more production of that single connection, and you're going to have less disruption in that product line. And outside of that, really, having this as a global standard opens up those options because you have a lot more manufacturers, again, to choose from. When a manufacturer is faced with an unplanned disruption, you can pivot and move to another manufacturer and not have to be worrying about whether that's going to connect to your patient's tube or they're going to need some special adapter in order to connect. And I'll say, again, we've seen such an increase, it feels like, in disruptions really since 2020. It's quite honestly felt nonstop. And so one of my favorite words coming out of it is redundancy, because I recognized that importance of having to have that ability to access product from multiple manufacturers. And that has really been a lifesaver through these supply disruptions, that we've been able to pivot to other manufacturers and have that same connection, and has really helped to minimize some of those negative consequences that supply disruptions cause for our patients. And then the last point on here is patient portability. So home care, this is a real concern for patients, because once they transition to home, they may be traveling, they may be admitting to different facilities that use different brands of tubing. And with the legacy items, sometimes those didn't connect, and it would cause a scramble and an issue to figure out how to connect and feed that patient. So again, having that standard connection, knowing when they go to different facilities in the US or even globally, traveling overseas, knowing that it's a standard connection, it makes it easy to provide that continuity of care across providers and facilities, and again, reduces that risk that this patient's going to have to miss a feeding due to a connection issue. So I want to share some updates on syringes, which I really do think showcases how that standard connection can be a benefit when we're faced with supply disruption. And so I want to call out that this update applies to all plastic medical syringes, both in legacy and ENFit. And so a little history, late in 2023, the FDA were looking into some reports they received on quality issues on plastic medication syringes manufactured in China, where they were breaking down more than they should. And so their recommendation at the time was to not use plastic syringes from China when it was possible. And then in March of this last year, they recommended an immediate transition away from plastic syringes made by certain manufacturers in China. And then for other manufacturers, they still had the recommendation to not use syringes manufactured in China if possible. And a large portion of enteral syringes are produced in China. And so there were repercussions from these recommendations to our supply chain, with many syringes being pulled from sale in the market. And it left little option for providers and patients when it came to the plastic medical syringe space. So the update, which is a great update, in August, the FDA updated the guidance to indicate that the FDA is not recommending a transition away from all enteral syringes manufactured in China at this time, rather just certain manufacturers. And so that's a change from their prior recommendations. Since then, we have seen some additional product re-enter the market, which has been great, but there still are shortages. And I can say, at least in home care, it's required me to have continual communication with the manufacturers and the distributors to know which products have been available at what time. Sometimes we have to switch month to month what we're offering our patients. But with that standard connection, it's given me more options. I can jump between the different manufacturers and still have something for patients, even if it's not the same brand that they're used to. And I will say, for some of the legacy style syringes, there have not been options that I've been able to switch to, and we've had some gaps in that space. So I think this just highlights again how redundancy in product offerings is important, and how having that standard connection gives a larger set of options when we are faced with these supply disruptions. Another update in the space that you'll see on here is a tariff that's been implemented on syringes imported from China, and they are subject to a 100% tariff. Now, enteral syringes right now are exempt through January 1st of 2026, but when that does expire, it is going to have an impact on the enteral space, and can very well lead to some supply disruption as people are trying to source other different syringes, and certainly will have a cost impact as well for patients, for those syringes, and for suppliers and manufacturers. So as you can see on the right, it talks about GIDS's actions and the way that they advocate for patients and really work and monitor the situation and make sure they do everything they can to minimize any negative consequences that these tariffs and these FDA concerns are going to have on patients. But again, this updates on what's coming. So if you're hearing that there's back orders or you're not getting the syringe you're used to, this is very likely the why. So most of this stuff I've already touched on, but I did want to call out the feeding the bed bullet, as this demonstrates a benefit to the ENFit connection, really for that patient experience. And some of you may be asking, what is feeding the bed? And this refers to an accidental disconnection of the feeding tube and the feeding bag or the drainage bag that really results, honestly, in a mess for patients because they get formula or gastric contents that spill out over their bed. But it's also a risk of missed nutrition because they're not getting that nutrition that they need. So historically, to address this, it's typically required some extra gadget or adapter to hold that feeding tube and feeding bag together. There were various products available on the market. We also saw lots of patients just use tape, which was a sticky mess for them to have to do every day. But the feedback from patients is with the ENFit threaded style connection versus that traditional push style connection, it's really largely solved the issue of the accidental disconnections, and it's been really positive feedback from patients.
Thanks, Janelle. The one thing I wanted to share real quick too is we're talking through some of these advancements and improvements. Over time, along with these, we've seen many best practices that have come out of ISMP. You're probably all familiar with those and see those when the lists come out every other year. They put out a new list, but then also ECRI, they put out their top 10 patient safety concerns each year, and I just wanted to share this flyer that we put together because a lot of these things, they don't necessarily come right out and say it, but if you actually kind of read between the lines, by actually moving to ENFit, NRFit, and or both, you can actually satisfy some of these best practices or adhere to some of these patient safety concerns. So I just wanted to quickly share this. I'm not going to read through all these, but just wanted to share quickly as a resource. You can actually basically satisfy a lot of these best practices simply by switching to these safer connectors. And an update there, because what I just shared with you was based on the latest list that were available. So basically ISMP's 2024 and then ECRI's 2024 listings. But just a few weeks ago, ECRI came out with their 2025 top 10 health technology hazards. And so it's 10 items, and if you get to number 8, it's about infusion lines. So in the title here, they really are calling out infection risk and tripping hazards from poorly managed infusion lines, but they do take this opportunity to remind us that while medication errors and misconnections are perhaps the best known dangers, infection risk and tripping hazards from mismanaged lines can be just as consequential. So they do basically put in here as a reminder that misconnections are a danger. So I guess they want to have people keep that in mind. Another update, I just wanted to share the Joint Commission's 2025 Hospital National Patient Safety Goals. They also have prevent infection on their list here as well. So I just wanted to kind of mention, in case you hadn't seen that it's it's basically on both those organizations' radars for 2025. Some more updates I wanted to share with you all. We get asked all the time, what's the conversion rate in whatever region? A lot of times the question is, what's the U.S. conversion rate of ENFit? And that's really hard to answer because it's like, well, conversion rate where? I mean, a lot of times we basically always focused on acute care. What's the conversion rate there? But other people may have in mind like, well, no, what's the home enteral nutrition? The long-term feeding tube users, what's their conversion rate? So it's there's a lot of qualifiers to that question. Additionally, there's over 7,200 hospitals in the United States. It's very difficult at any moment in time to ascertain, what the conversion status of each and every one is. It's just not practical to be able to do so. But years ago, we had the idea to, we can't do all 7,200 plus hospitals, but we can do manageable lists. So we can do like 25 hospitals here, 10 hospitals here. And so the thought was, well, why don't we use U.S. News and World Report's best ranked hospitals, because that'll give us a manageable list. And so we picked these 4 categories: the best children's honor roll, because these 4 categories seems like they would certainly be using enteral devices. And so it was best children's hospitals, honor roll, top 25 children's hospitals for GI, top 25 neonatology hospitals, and then top 25 adult, basically GI centers. And we have now done this 3 years in a row. This is what came out in 2023. So this is the second time we did it, but I did want to share the update here, the list from 2024. And I tried my best to make these overlays so they kind of morph and you can see how the pie charts change. But hopefully if you have a keen enough eye, you can see these have all gone up. And I would say these percentages were pretty good, or pretty impressive even in 2023. But as we move through what's been reported through 2024, we are at 90 or greater percent on all these now. And so, if you have a list of 25 and you're 96% converted, that means there's one hospital out of 25 that's not. So we're hoping that when we do this list for this year, that it'll come back and we'll have some of these pie charts will say 100%. I think this is very encouraging too, because by looking at the best ranked hospitals, hopefully they're best ranked because they're the best, and we feel like they're setting ENFit as a best practice. So we're anxious to see what the 2025 listing will be, and keep an eye out for that, because it should come out later this year. And with that, I will pass it to Janelle so she can discuss some improvements to patient access for medication administration items.
Thank you, Ben. I'm going to start by going over some of the tools that are available out there for medication administration. And you can find these on the stayconnected.org website for GEDSA. And these first tools really walk patients and providers through proper technique for liquid medication administration with ENFit. And so you can see on here, it walks through the different ways to administer medication based on how that patient is administering their liquid medication. So whether they're drawing up through a milk straw, whether they're pulling out through a medication cup, it shows some of the different bottle adapters that are available for ENFit. And again, just really is helping them walk through that technique. So again, these are available for training purposes for staff and also for patients and caregivers as well. There are also some videos available, and these can be found on YouTube, and they have quite a lot of hits. So these have been very useful for folks if they really just want to see that full visual on medication administration. This one here focuses on home care administration, and so that link is available there. And then this next one is focused on inpatient settings for medication administration. So again, these can be found on YouTube and are just great resources for folks who really need to see that visual and have some good training on medication administration. So for some people don't recognize that these medication administration devices are available in an ENFit compatible format. So everything you see there on the left does come and is available in an ENFit format. I want to go over a tool that was created for patients and for providers so that they can really understand what's available and know the side-by-side. So Ben, if you want to actually click on the link, we can look to see what the tool is. And again, this is a pharmacy resource guide, and it has some FAQs on there. But what I think is really great is as you scroll down, it has these side-by-side photos with the legacy items on the left, the ENFit items on the right, so people can really see what these products are. They can see what they're called, so that if they're needing to explain it to a physician or a pharmacist, or they're needing to look up the items, they know what they're called and can look them up. So it's a really helpful tool in giving that visual and letting them know what's available out there and how to search for it. So at the very bottom of this page, there's some links. So there's a link specifically for providers, and for that provider tool, it's going to give them links for where they can purchase these items from distributors and medical suppliers so that they can dispense them for their patients. And then there's a resources for patients and caregivers. And again, this tool is really going to more patient focused for where they can go to purchase online to purchase these things for themselves. And there's also some other links to different tools and resources as well for them. There's a single page resource guide, and this is helpful if the patient needs to print it out and take it into their doctor or to their pharmacist. And it's also available in Spanish.
Let me share that one. I'm sorry. Yeah, so the single page one is here actually.
And there's also a link on there for an ENFit Exchange Facebook group. And this is an exchange for patients where patients and caregivers can join this group and exchange information and products. So it has a link for that resource as well. You can advance, Ben. All right. So, despite these great resources and despite that patients can access these online, we still hear all the time from referrals and patients that as their patients transition home, they're having trouble accessing these ENFit pharmacy supplies. And many patients don't want or can't afford to purchase these items on their own. And so they go to their retail pharmacy, and their retail pharmacy is sending them back to home care, really because there's a lack of awareness at the pharmacy level about ENFit, as well as a lack of for them to access and order ENFit pharmacy items. So you may ask, why can't home care provide? And so typically with the enteral benefit through insurance, it covers the actual nutrition going through the tube and the supplies to administer that nutrition, but it doesn't cover and include coverage of medication syringes or the medication bottle adapters. So home care companies, by and large, don't carry and aren't able to provide those items. And so we have to think of how do we tackle this lack of access. And so GEDSA started a retail pharmacy committee last year to help address this gap. And the committee includes clinicians, manufacturers, pharmacists. I'm a part of this committee, and we meet every 2 weeks, and we've really just been working to figure out what are the gaps, how can we start to tackle these gaps. And one of the first things that we recognized is that these large retail pharmacies, the way that their systems work, they actually utilize what's called drug databases like First Data Bank or Medispan that are listed on this slide. And that is a drug database for prescription items. And their system, if the prescription item's not loaded in there, they're not even able to see it and dispense it. They don't have an ability to order those items. And so ENFit does require a prescription. It has a prescription designation in order to dispense ENFit syringes. Now, there are some manufacturers who pursued an over-the-counter designation, but in the space, it's the minority. And so in order for retail pharmacies to be able to dispense these syringes, they do need to be loaded into these databases for them to access them. And so one member already has recently been successful in getting their products uploaded into First Data Bank. And so we're hoping to see the others as well get their products in there. And that's one step to access for retail pharmacy. The next step, or I should say it's a concurrent step, is working with the medical distributors that supply the retail pharmacies. Right now, they don't carry a large amount of the ENFit pharma items in their systems on their pharmacy platforms. And it really is because there hasn't been the volume, because pharmacies haven't had access. It's a very chicken and egg situation, as they want the volume to carry it. There's not going to be volume till there's use. So that's another thing that we're working with those distributors on and with the manufacturers to try and get access there as well. Kind of in line with the volume question, there's not a whole lot of data out there on what the need is for these patients. And so this committee, along with the Oli Foundation, is developing a patient consumer survey to help quantify the problem of access. And so it's going to ask things like, how many medications are they on per month? What types of syringes? What sizes of syringes do they use? What do they need per month? What are they using today? And it'll be a really helpful survey to gather the information that's needed to get the message out there and to tackle this issue. And so keep an eye out. It's going to be coming out soon, and we'd love for you to share it with your patients and their caregivers so that we can start to collect this valuable data.
All right, thank you so much for that information, Janelle. That gets us into the third module, which is conversion planning and additional resources. So GETSA has basically, we've had for forever this three-phase approach to conversion planning, and it's been pretty successful. Like, a lot of facilities have sort of followed this plan. It's made up of initial awareness phase. That's the initial sort of communications and learnings about the change. That's, things like webinars like today, really just the sort of high level overview of what the change means. The second phase of this is the preparation phase. That's gets more into the education of it, actually getting your hands on product, evaluating products, working with your vendors. And then the final phase is the actual adoption phase, and this is where you, actually facilitate the transition. So you work with the your supply chain, your distributors, and really pull together any internal stakeholders to let them be aware of the change and how it's going to impact them. In planning through these three phases, I really encourage you to visit our website, stayconnected.org. On there, we have a plethora of tools to help with conversion planning. So we have a huge FAQ section. We have transition checklists, and we actually have, these are actually tailored for different departments. So like there's one for nursing, there's one for pharmacy. I think we have 4 or 5 different transition checklists. We have videos about folks that have been through conversions. They talked about their experience and how they did it. So just a lot of materials available to you there. Now, what's the update? Well, I mentioned earlier this ISMP Part 1 where they talk about the problem. They go through the survey and to quantify TB misconnection problem. Part 2 came out 2 weeks after that. So November of last year, they put out the Part 2. Part 2 is really the solution. So here they talk through, well, how do you resolve or eliminate these TB misconnections? And in this, and it's maybe a 5-10 minute read. It's linked here. I really encourage you to check it out sometime. They provide their sort of approach to how you would do conversion planning, and it's a little bit more granular than our high level sort of three-phase approach, but I'll go through what they have. And if you click on theirs, each one of these bullets you're about to see has a tiny, paragraph dedicated to it. So it really describes like, what does this mean? Again, I just really encourage you to check that resource out. But the first one was promote a culture of safety and learning. The second is plan for device conversion, identify key stakeholders, complete an FMEA, partner with device vendors next. Then it's evaluate the products, then do the use simulation. Then you want to designate resources. You want to then maintain an adequate supply of devices, educate your practitioners, plan for discharge and outpatient care. And then you want to educate patients. And then, of course, you want to have this feedback loop where you report and learn from errors. Now, regardless of if you do the sort of three-phase approach or if you get into the more detailed one I just shared from ISMP, one thing that is central to both of these is you really need a transition leader for a successful, smooth transition. That what we have seen over time, the transitions that have gone the best are the ones that really did have a strong transition leader, someone that really took this by the reins, pulled together the different stakeholders, and really made it happen. Because you have all these different departments, and left to themselves in their own silos, it just is it's not the way to do this. So you really have to have someone that can pull this all the people together. And this is just one example, but I mean it could be as complex, or it could be more complex than this, or depending on how your facility structure, it could be maybe a little bit more simplified. But typically you're dealing with nursing, pharmacy, the emergency room, the IQ or CCU or NICU, surgery, supply chain, risk management. You have patient safety leader. You got to deal with discharge planning, purchasing or central supply, endoscopy or the GI lab, and interventional radiology. So, and there's probably even more than that we could talk about, but it's a lot, and it's a lot of coordination. And you really do have to have that transition leader if you're trying to have as smooth a transition as possible. And just some additional conversion planning and resources I wanted to share with you. On our website, we have a product resource page. So the intention of this page is that if you're planning a conversion, instead of having to hunt all over the internet trying to find the different bits and pieces and parts and items you need, all of our members are listed on this page, and very briefly, their key categories are listed. So if you're looking for like a certain type of feeding tube or a certain type of syringe or pharmacy accessory, you can go to this one page and see who has what and then link to them very efficiently. So it's meant to really just make the process easier. Another good resource we have is our newsletters. They're all archived on this link, and you can actually also sign up to receive the newsletter there. That comes out every month. We try to keep everyone informed, the latest, greatest there, so I encourage you to follow that. Of course, we also have LinkedIn, where we try to share information several times a week with updates, so I encourage you to follow us there. And as Janelle mentioned, we have a YouTube page that has, I don't know, gosh, over 20 or 30 videos that are all very informative and have proven to be quite helpful. On our website, too, that I mentioned earlier, just some notable things. We do have the FAQs get a lot of hits. So do the transition checklist, and then, of course, the pharmacy resource guide, which we opened up a minute ago, and Janelle was talking about it. And just some additional things that this is kind of an update because I don't know that a lot of people are aware of this. We do actually have, we're obviously speaking English here today, but GETSA is a global organization, and I'm sure even here in the United States, there's I'm sure plenty of times where you're dealing with people that are not, English is not their first language. So we do have resources available in other languages. We have a webinar now shown here toward the top that is actually transcribed in Spanish. We did this with Falampe last summer, so that's a good resource for that's in Spanish. We also, when we went to Braspen in Brazil at their last conference and gave a presentation, that's also transcribed, but into Portuguese. So if you have Portuguese speakers, that's a good resource. And then we have other languages available too. So most of the content, like the protocols and checklists and FAQs, things like that, are in these different languages. We have them in French, Spanish, Italian, Dutch, German, and Portuguese. Now, where do you find those? Because this is done differently. Everybody does it different on their website. Some people put it at the top. Well, ours, if you're looking for it, it's at the bottom. So every one of our web pages has the same footer. And right here, you can see where it says, you just click on your desired language and it will take you to that page. And just an update as well, just speaking of different languages and areas, I did want to share that we are pushing very hard to spread awareness about ENFit into Latin America. We have basically become, I guess, sort of partnered or working with Falampe and Braspen. Like I said, we were at Braspen at their last conference. We're presenting at Falampe this year, and we gave a webinar to them last year, and we'll probably go to Braspen this year too. But anyway, we're working with those groups and the manufacturers that are servicing that region. It's been reported to us that there is an uptick in conversion. It's not, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's certainly not zero. We do know that there's several hospitals that have converted, and we're hoping to continue that momentum and grow conversion down in Latin America. Some other items that are available, we have what we call toolkits. These are interactive teaching stations. So these are available on our websites if you're planning a conversion. These, I think these are very helpful because if you're like me, when you get something in hand, it makes so much more sense. So, for people to be able to get these and take the product out and see how the items twist together, so now a twist connection, how they disconnect, what the different bits and pieces and parts are, it all of a sudden becomes literally, it's tangible, and it's, it's no longer some sort of insurmountable abstract sort of thing we're talking about. It's right here in front of you, and this is easy. So I encourage you to check these out. We really try to pack them full of resources and plenty of educational products for people to kind of demonstrate with. And with that, I'll let Janelle cover a few more resources that people find very helpful that you may not be aware of.
Yeah, and I just want to, there's just a couple of these cleaning procedures, and I know this is something I've used, my team's used, and it's the most accessed tool on the GEDSA website on the stayconnected.org, but two really good resources on cleaning. And so this first resource is for cleaning extension sets, so patients who have low profile devices or use an extension set for length. This goes over how to clean those ENFit style extension sets, and you can see they can use really any kind of brush, either a toothbrush that's dedicated for this purpose, not for cleaning teeth, or there are some brushes on the market as well that they can use. And this just really goes through the procedure and is a nice tool for patients and even again for training to provide. And then this next one that's coming up, this is for actually cleaning the end of the feeding tube itself, as opposed to the extension. And so it is a little different. You saw in the last one, with the extension sets, you can soak them. You obviously can't do that with the feeding tube in the stomach. So again, this tool just walks them through a cleaning procedure to make sure that they're able to keep their tube nice and clean. And just really great resources we want you guys to know about. And the links are at the bottom of this slide so you can access them.
Thanks, Janelle. And with that, we'll open up our Q&A session. To Madison, I think you may have been monitoring these as they've come in.
Yeah, absolutely. So somebody said RX Crush makes some pill pouches that have ENFit connections. Currently, we are paying a tariff of 12.8%. Is there help available to peel those tariffs based on recent FDA rulings?
That's a good question. The sort of appeal process that you have to go through with the USTR, to the best of my knowledge, that has to be kind of done by the manufacturer or by the importer or whoever's handling the importation. So I know that there are ways to apply for exemptions, but since GEDSA itself we don't manufacture anything. We're here to provide education. I can't go through the process to tell you how it works, but there are ways to go about it. And I know that there are pathways to, now whether they accept it or reject it, that's up to the United States Trade Representative, but there are options available to try to get exemptions.
Thanks, Ben. The next question I have is, does the GEDSA Retail Pharmacy Committee send out updates / a newsletter to outpatient pharmacies?
So we don't have a formal newsletter that goes out to retail pharmacies. We don't have like a dedicated separate newsletter. Madison, you could actually speak to that with the what's the national we have so many organizations we deal with. You want to talk about is it NCPA is the
NCPA?
Yeah.
So NCPA does have a newsletter that comes out every month that is related to retail pharmacy, so that might be a good resource for you guys. And as far as retail pharmacy updates from GEDSA, most of that is communicated in our GEDSA monthly newsletter if we have any kind of findings or anything like that. If you're interested in participating in the Retail Pharmacy Committee, though, feel free to reach out to Ben or I, and I'll post our email in the chat, and we're happy to have you involved in those communications as well.
Yeah, and the NCPA, since we now have a really good line of communication with them, as we get updates to provide, we'll provide those updates to them so that they're able to then inform their followers or their members.
Somebody asked which manufacturer has the OTC syringe. Is it Avanos?
I am aware of their having an OTC one, and I recently learned apparently Vesco also now has an OTC designation. So I don't know much about that one because I think that one's fairly recent, but those are the two at least I'm aware of. There could be others, but I believe those are the two that at least the two I know about.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, it's not all the products that are OTC. There's certain products that they carry in their line that they've gotten the OTC designation, but it's not across the board everything that's offered.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yep.
Thank you, guys. Somebody asked, is there an advocacy for clinician and patient safety, particulate inhalation / underdosing with regard to medication crushing for enteral administration?
Don't we've that topic I don't believe has come up among our clinical folks or committees that we work with, but if that is something that we should be involved in, I'm happy to get involved with it. So feel free to reach out to us. We're always trying to receive feedback and improve patient safety and actually honestly improve the user experience on these things too. So feel free to send that feedback to us. Matter of fact, it'll actually show up on the next slide, but you can easily get in touch with Madison and myself or any of the people we interact with through info at gedsa.org. And if you just email us there, we're happy to follow up with you on items like that.
Thanks, Ben. And as a heads up to everybody, I also put that link to the Qualtrics survey for CE credit in the chat, but on the next slide, we'll have a QR code for that as well. Another question we have is, have there been any studies comparing effectiveness of the toothbrush versus other brushes available? The toothbrush is a bit messy still, in my opinion.
Yeah, so there was a study done at Mercy Children's in Kansas City. I think they have a paper out where they compared the, I think one of the cleaning brushes against like a toothbrush. I'm failing. I deal with so many papers. I'm trying to remember the title of that one, but there is a paper that has been done, a study basically where they did compare those, where they use like a UV marker actually, I think to indicate like soiled tubes, and it's pretty interesting how they actually went about it. But it is available out there. I just don't have the title of it off the top of it. Again, you could email us, and I'm sure we have it on our we have it somewhere. We could dig it up and provide that to you.
And it looks like we got 2 more inquiries. Someone said, thanks for hosting the webinar. Can you provide a history of the back order for ENFit? How readily available is that device?
So ENFit, we've actually in the U.S. just had our first conversion over last summer, and really trying to gain some, pick up some momentum, and hopefully this year we'll get a foothold and really start getting some ENFit conversions. There were a few FDA 510K device clearances that were needed that have really actually been the holdup on the ENFit side, but to my knowledge, most of those, or if not all of them that were really needed, like that represented a real product gap, I believe we now have all those, and those are now basically entering the warehouses and getting sort of ramped up so that implementations can begin to occur. So I'm hoping we do start seeing more and more of those. And just matter of fact, back in November, we did a really nice, I'm biased, but a great webinar with the hospital, with the clinicians that did the first ENFit transition. So if you're curious, that webinar is recorded on our YouTube channel too, and you can learn more about ENFit and how they went through that process of their conversion.
Awesome. And the last question I have is, there's a lot of feedback from enteral patients and caregivers that ENFit makes blenderized tube feeding incredibly difficult. Can anything be done with ENFit to better accommodate fixed/blended foods?
So yeah, so blenderized diets have been studied. Mayo Clinic did a study on it, kind of in parallel with the FDA. And really, I think the key finding there was that if you are using a large tube, like a 20 French or 22 French or larger, at that point, the ID of the tube is larger than the ENFit connector. So for those, especially for those really large tubes, you'll probably find that, there were some, during the test, I guess there were some decreased performance with ENFit. However, for bolus feeds, actually, ENFit did better for those sizes. So it's kind of bizarre. But the other interesting thing, though, that to consider in that conversation is if you're dealing with like a low profile device, you can't see the actual inside of that connection, but actually the inside of that, unless, especially on a right angle connector, on like the bayonet fitting, the key that goes in a low profile device, That's actually the same, if not smaller, sometimes even smaller than the ENFit through bore. So actually that's the bottleneck in some of these systems. If you have a straight like bolus set, in my experience, that's basically the same diameter, so not really an issue there. But there are things that have been done. In Japan, a company came out with a compatible, ENFit compatible solution to basically make the through bore larger, but then they also had a low profile device with the actual connection point was larger as well, so that they basically removed that bottleneck. So I do believe there are compatible solutions that are available that need to be explored, and I encourage our manufacturers to try to pursue those items. With innovation, a lot of times they keep their cards kind of close to the chest, but I'm hoping that we do end up with more and more solutions as we move forward.
That's all the questions I have.
All right, and with that, then we'll share. I know we're a minute over the hour, so we'll share our code. Madison, they just need to scan this or click on the link in the chat, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, and the link is in the chat. And if you guys have any trouble with the link or the QR code, feel free to. I put my email in the chat, and I'm happy to send it directly to you as well.
We'll leave that up for just a second longer. Again, I have one more slide, so if you miss it or can't get it to work on your camera, just feel free to reach out to us and we'll provide that to you. And the way you can reach out is the info@getsa.org, and of course our website is stayconnected.org. Greatly appreciate everybody's time and participation today, and I appreciate Mo for providing or putting this together, hosting it. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you all for your attendance.
Thanks, everyone.